Monsters coming down the hall, spires cover all the walls. Serial killer is on the line, wants to know if you have the time. Aliens are landing soon, this will mean certain doom. A chainsaw sputters and comes alive, blood and death are close behind. One thing you can be certain of, the zombies just can't get enough. Just one more bite is all they want. The ghosts downstairs are on the hunt. The Shade Chronicles are keeping score, that's what all the writing's for. They record their stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Welcome to Season 3 of the Shade Chronicles, a podcast featuring short works of sci-fi and horror fiction. Here are your hosts.
Hi, this is Derek Leford.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
The Shade Chronicles are keeping score, that's what all the writing's for. They record their stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Super Serial by Lawrence Trokey, Part 1. Power Max stood atop his opponent with his heavily armored boot on his chest. Laser Wolf lay bleeding, struggling to breathe under the weight of the boot. All of his weapons were destroyed by Power Max right before he was nearly pummeled to death by the so-called hero. Even with advanced alien technology and weaponry, he was no match for Power Max's near invulnerability, super strength, and supersonic flight powers. He was beaten and defenseless. Their battle started in the Battery area of New York City. Power Max had hunted Laser Wolf down and found his secret lair, a submerged fortress hidden in the waters of the Hudson River in the Upper Bay. Power Max plowed through several feet of water at a high rate of speed and crashed through the protective barrier wall like a torpedo. The lair quickly filled with the Hudson's waters, and Laser Wolf barely escaped from being drowned by the attack. He made it to an escape pod, which jettisoned him to the surface. He was met by Power Max ripping off the hatch of the pod in an attempt to reach his prey. Extremely pissed by the reckless and violent attack by his foe, Laser Wolf unloaded his powerful laser weapons at maximum capacity, built into his armored battlesuit right into the face of Power Max. The powerful blast launched Power Max across the bay. He eventually crashed into the battery's harbor, destroying and sinking a portion of the pier. Taking a moment to recover, Laser Wolf tried to gather his wits for what he knew would be the fight to the death with Power Max. Having once been allies not so long ago, now he was reduced to just another target on Power Max's insane hunt to rid the world of super-powered individuals who were now blamed for all the world's problems. Having the backing of the world governments meant Power Max could be unchecked in how he handled bringing his fellow masked Avengers to justice. The increasing incidence of superpowered battles causing massive damage to populated areas. The alarming number of innocent bystanders harmed or killed as a result of the carnage for what appeared to be wild, superpowered gang wars between so-called good guys and bad guys had finally taken its toll on the patience and goodwill of society. At first, many believed these autonomous costumed crusaders would protect them from what appeared to be an ever-increasing threat-rich environment that saw mad scientists, alien invasions, and gargantuan monster attacks on the rise. However, when the death toll and damage costs started to escalate, ordinary people said enough is enough. Soon these superpowered individuals were told to hang up their capes for good, or they would be prosecuted and held responsible for all the damage and harm they caused while protecting the people. When some refused, the authorities recruited Power Max, the most powerful of these individuals, to police and stop the defiant ones who continued their activities despite the official order to cease and desist. He was only too willing to be the proxy for the government because it meant he could continue to operate, only now he was free to let loose unrestrained in his effort to rid the world of the superpowered. Laser Wolf knew only too well about the bloodthirsty nature of his former crime-fighting companion. Near the end of their tenure, together in the League of Excellence, Laser Wolf watched his friend become more brutal in his attacks against his enemies. In one epic battle in the streets of Cairo, Egypt, Power Max was on the ropes against an alien giant called the Totality, who was intent on enslaving the population to build a new kingdom like those of the ancient pharaohs. In a desperate attempt to get the upper hand in a losing battle, Power Max thrust himself at supersonic speed and punched through the chest armor of the Totality, causing his alien heart to explode and effectively killing him. Power Max burst through the back of his opponent, covered in green, alien, blood, and matter. After that, something changed in Power Max. His initial powerlessness at the hands of the entity had an effect on his mental state. Maybe it was fear of death or the thought of losing a fight that caused the ethical and moral change in him. Regardless, he no longer tried to restrain himself in a fight. He would kill enemies and justify it as necessary to stop them and to protect those in harm's way. After the League was ordered to disband and cease all operations, Power Max started hunting down those in the League that refused to obey the order. Even those that would have called Power Max a friend at one time did not receive any quarter of mercy. Power Max destroyed them like he was dispatching his worst enemies. Laser Wolf engaged the engines of his boot jets and pressed the attack while Power Max appeared incapacitated. Another blast from his lasers sent Power Max plowing into a grove of trees of the nearby park, leaving behind a trench cut in the ground in his wake. It was the middle of the afternoon and the park was full of visitors, who quickly evacuated the area when they realized they were in the middle of yet another insane battle of super titans. Power Max laid on top the pile of debris created by his fall into the trees and bushes. He brushed some soil off his arm and ran a hand across his face. It came away with blood from a gash across his cheek. Then he smiled. With that, he launched himself off the pile like a rocket and zeroed in on Laser Wolf's location. He unleashed on Laser Wolf a series of lightning-fast punches and jabs that quickly disabled Laser Wolf's weapons and did incredible damage to the man behind the armor. The coup de grace was a massive roundhouse punch that sent Laser Wolf flying, his helmet and armor barely keeping his head attached to his body. It did damage his spinal cord, rendering him paralyzed from the neck down. His body crashed in a nearby rooftop with a heavy thud, bits of his armor shattering and scattering around on impact. Now Power Max looked down into the eyes of Laser Wolf through the damaged faceplate that occasionally spit sparks, causing Laser Wolf to wince.
You fought bravely, Laser Wolf, but your term has come to an end. Today, justice will be served.
Ah, give me a fucking break, you megalomaniac. What are we in junior high drama class? You may think you're doing something noble here, but we both know what you really are, a stone-cold killer. Blood shot from Laser Wolf's mouth as he hurled the accusation.
You openly defied the order to stand down and invited this upon yourself.
Power Max shot back. You think you're better than me because you wear a badge? For real? You're the worst of us. You've gone dark and you know it. You say you are just following orders, but let's look at what you've done. You hunted down and killed every super being on the planet, without considering who they were and what they've done to deserve your justice. And don't try to say you are protecting the people. You don't give a shit about them. Otherwise, you wouldn't rage through the city after your latest super victim, leaving a wake of destruction and death. And whatever concept of justice you think you're fighting for died a long time ago.
Mind your tongue, Laser Wolf. My ire is rising.
What? Are you gonna kill me worse now that I'm pissing you off? You're ridiculous with this whole ancient noble hero bullshit. No one believes you really are from some line of Vikings that were blessed by the gods. Laser Wolf had to cough hard for a few moments, causing more blood to be expelled through his mouth and nose.
You should concern yourself less with my beginning and more with your end.
Power Max leaned nearer to see how his threat would land. Fuck you! Now, let's get it over with unless your plan is to kill me by boring me to death. Power Max smiled at the insult. Then he quickly pressed his armored boot into the chest cavity of Laser Wolf, crushing through the armor, then flesh and bone. Laser Wolf gasped loudly, and then his head fell back to the roof decking, his eyes as wide as saucers, gazing into eternity. Power Max was scraping the blood and goo off his boot onto the rooftop when he heard the sirens from below. Better to get this over with. he thought. He launched himself off the roof and glided gently down to the street below, where a collection of police vehicles, including heavily armored military-style tactical trucks, waited for him. After landing, he scanned the crowd of uniforms for the FBI Special Agent Brock Cannon. He saw the agent getting out of a SUV and he walked toward him, ignoring the armed personnel gathering around him. He walked like a man not to be trifled with, and most gave him a wide berth as he approached Cannon. Cannon walked over to him and gently took him by the arm. "Walk with me," he said, but it was more of a request than a demand.
Laser Wolf has been dispatched, Agent Cannon.
I saw that, the agent acknowledged as if in passing. "Look, Power Max, we need to talk."
Proceed.
Power Max giving the agent permission to speak. Cannon leaned in close. "The folks in charge are wanting a timeline for your decommissioning. I know this seems soon, after you just took care of Laser Wolf and all, but they don't want to wait too long before they can announce that the super problem has been dealt with."
This does seem to be in haste. What if another threat emerges that we did not previously detect? Another superpowered entity that decides to come forth and wreak havoc? Should I not remain vigilant against such a possibility for safe measure?
"I understand your concerns, my friend. The powers that be assure me you were quite thorough in your apprehension and elimination of all known threats, so they feel confident that you can stand down, effective immediately." The agent paused to give Power Max time to process what he was saying.
And if I am unwilling to leave the citizens so unprotected and exposed to harm, what then?
Power Max was agitated at the thought of hanging up his cape and cowl for good. "Look, I know you are dedicated to protecting those you serve. You know we are grateful for all you did. However, this was the plan all along when you were approached to be the one to bring peace and order to things. You've done a remarkable job, and now you can retire as the hero you truly are. Don't do anything to spoil your legacy. You could be remembered for generations as a savior of mankind if you are willing to cooperate." Cannon tried to reason with Power Max and hoped he would be agreeable.
I will stand down for now. However, I will not be far should a threat arise. You can tell your superiors that is what I decided.
Power Max crossed his massive arms in front of his armored chest defiantly. "That's fair. I will tell them that," Cannon assured Power Max.
Farewell then for now, Agent Cannon.
With that, Power Max blasted off of the ground into the sky aggressively, causing Cannon and anyone else nearby to be knocked over by his wake. A sonic boom followed as he soared at supersonic speed into the sky, a less than subtle reminder of Power Max's superior prowess and strength. Weeks later, Power Max sat in a large wooden chair with a high back that resembled a throne. He was naked and a bottle of some alcoholic beverage sat on one of the large arms of the chair, almost empty. He stared out of the large plate glass window at the mountaintops surrounding his secret home in the Himalayas. The window gave him an amazing 180-degree view of the majestic mountaintops around him. He was drunk and had been for several days now. His hair was a messy mane that hung in his face, and his chin was covered by thick whiskers that hinted at a full beard if he let it go much longer. His skin was taut and stretched over his bulging, corded muscles. Visible, too, were many scars that crisscrossed his body, thin ridges of damaged tissue that striped his otherwise perfect complexion. His culture considered these to be badges of honor won in battle, and from the looks of it, he would be considered the greatest warrior ever. So numerous were the old wounds on his body. The greatest warrior maybe once, he thought, but not now. He was useless, unnecessary, unneeded, and unwanted. He felt like a shell of his former self. And despite his best efforts to drown the melancholy that plagued him, he still felt the sting of disgrace penetrate through the fog of alcohol to remind him that he was now worthless. He stood and drank the last of the liquid in the bottle and then threw it aside. It shattered against a column made from large stones. He walked slowly to the window and leaned against it with the weight of his body resting on his raised forearms, his head hanging down between them. From deep within him, a sudden sadness overtook him and his gut convulsed. He began to sob violently as his whole body shook and spasmed. Then he reared back and slammed his fists against the thick glass. It exploded under his powerful blow, and shards sprayed in all directions, once the brutal winds outside were unleashed into his lair. Hurricane-force gusts now whipped through the room and battered his naked form. He stood erect and spread his arms with open hands, as if to embrace the frigid whirlwind slamming against his body and wreaking havoc inside his home. Frost quickly started to form on his hair, his face, in his beard and along his exposed skin, but he did not flinch or recoil. He leaned into the gusting vortex. As he bore this merciless assault, a thought occurred to him that distracted him for a moment. The punishing winds had a sobering effect, and it allowed the spark of an idea to form and then expand into a raging flame. Of course, he thought. Why not? He turned from the broken window and walked casually back to the wooden chair that was now overturned from the cyclonic winds that raced around the interior space, blowing bits of glass, small possessions, and scraps of paper and other debris around in the room. He bent over and reached down for a small remote control device, pressed a button, and then large storm shutters began rolling down and across the windows. The shutters cut off the pounding frigid air and also the light from outside. Power Max stood in the dark for a moment and then pressed another button which turned on the interior lights. He went to his bedroom to put on some clothing, ignoring the destruction and carnage his tirade had just caused in his home. The maximum security prison just outside of Phoenix, Arizona had been retrofitted several years ago to house major threat-level inmates who possessed superpowers. All of those cells except for one were empty, mostly due to Power Max's crusade of elimination rather than incarceration. The one occupied cell was home to inmate 4272, also known as Dr. Mercurius, an evil genius who was thwarted by the League of Excellence years ago for trying to develop a weapon powered by a mini black hole, which he would use to arm his legion of android soldiers and then send them marching to take over the world. The League destroyed his army of robots and stopped the Doctor before he could deploy his weapon. Dr. Mercurius sat in his cell reading when he heard a rumbling sound. The bed he sat on began to shake, and he leaned over the edge to see cracks form and spread across the floor of his cell. Alarms started going off in the prison just as the floor exploded into the cell, throwing him back on his bed. A dark masked figure rose from the hole in the floor and reached for him through the cloud of dust and debris filling his cell. The Doctor scrambled away from the outstretched hand that came towards him, but to no avail. In a flash, the dark figure grabbed the Doctor by the collar and dragged him off the bed and into the hole effortlessly. Armored guards rushed into the room with high-powered energy weapons and fired into the hole in a vain attempt to stop the escaping Doctor and the dark figure. To be continued next time on the Shade Chronicles Podcast.
For 2 seasons, the Shade Chronicles podcast has introduced you to a universe of the scary, strange, weird, and fascinating. Now all of the stories from the first 2 seasons of the podcast are collected and available in a hardback book for your reading enjoyment. Newly edited and revised, experience the fright and wonder again of the stories from the Shade Chronicles, and join us on an exploration of imagination. Find your copy of Tales from the Shade Chronicles podcast on Amazon today, also available in paperback and Kindle versions.
Attention Shade Chronicle podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles Podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular programming.
The Shore of Ararat by Robert Pettus. Dagon opened his tired eyes and saw nothing, only blackness. Lightning from the continuous storm flashed, alighting briefly the oval-shaped interior of the ship's steerage. Dagon saw the 6 other members of his species chosen to board the ship, including Enlil and Nabu, with whom he had the closest bond. He had children with Nabu, but they weren't chosen to make the voyage.
They were now somewhere at the bottom of this new, supernaturally raging sea. Sea monkeys. Dagon's vision adjusted. He could now see shapes, but nothing more. Down in the underbelly of the ship, it was never light, and at night it was difficult to see much of anything. The ship rocked. Enlil vomited, which fell floorward, and joined the rest of the putrid, slimy collection of bio-waste. Lightning again struck. The ship creaked in the wind as if to at any moment split and sink. They had been at sea for nearly 150 days. Noah was becoming more panicked and paranoid by the week. Whenever he came down to the steerage, which was rare, the torch he carried flickered in the darkness and showed the thick-bearded face of a man driven to megalomaniacal insanity, his eyes darting from wall to wooden wall, his long fingernails scratching at his throat and creating cuts and scabs. Blood dribbled continuously down his neck. His Adam's apple looked like an actual apple. Dagon knew not where Noah got the light for his torch amidst this raging sea. He also knew not where Noah procured the food he hauled down to each of the groups of animals every day. Perhaps from his God he was always talking about. Dagon feared this God. Noah said it was good to be fearful. Noah hated chimpanzees. He hated all apes other than humans, but he seemed to despise chimps the most. He considered them a living example delivered from God of how humans are not to behave. He was afraid of them too. Dagon knew that. Dagon, hungry, moved toward Noah's flickering shadow. He grabbed at the bars of his sea cell. "Stay back, beast," said Noah, darting wildly away from Dagon's cell to the other side of the room, whereafter he again fell away back into the room's middle after being startled by a sleeping gorilla lying across the hall near the bars of its own cell. Dagon made a call at Noah, hoping to communicate his desire for some food and maybe for a cleaner cell. Noah didn't receive that message. He instead shrieked, pointing his torch forward toward Dagon. Dagon fell backward into his cell. He was afraid of fire. The boat rocked for several more weeks before the storm abruptly abated and the skies cleared, better lighting the steerage. Noah made his rounds more regularly, now more alert, but somehow also more paranoid. It was a manic sort of paranoia, though, his gaze shifting from one of elation and excitement immediately into one of anxiety and stress. He was always looking up at the ceiling of the room, as if something might at any moment drop down upon him in attack. That was impossible, though. All the animals were still in their cages. Many of them weren't even alive anymore, having long ago died from starvation or disease or both. The voyage had to end, eventually. Nabu woke Dagon, who sat up from his place sleeping in the filth and looked outward from his cell to Noah, with his family trailing, examine the state of each animal living in this part of the Cyclopean boat. "What will happen to these beasts?" said Noah's son, Shem. "After sacrificing several of them to Yahweh, we will, after the waters recede, release the rest back unto the earth." Why does our God allow such creatures to procreate in this new world? Did he not create the flood to eradicate incurably sinful creatures? God's will be for us neither to understand nor question. Shem, angered, lowered his head, teeth grinding. After examining the rest of the non-human primates in this section of the ship, Noah and Shem, together with the rest of their family, made to leave the shadowy steerage. We will soon make landfall atop the summit of what was once Mount Ararat. We are landing atop the mountain? The mountain is now ashore. Who is piloting the ship? God. We have no need to pilot this ship." Shem vexed, they left. Dagon looked at Nabu. She was sullen. So was Enlil, who now sat cowering in the corner of the cell with several others of the group of chimps. So they were to be sacrificed. After having miraculously survived the murderous planet-destroying flood, he and his family, at least some of them, were to be slaughtered and dismembered. Their blood spread circularly around this new home atop the summit of Ararat, as if a magical barrier. Dagon had seen it happen before, when he and the members of his former nomadic band had watched from within the forest as humans made sacrifices. Sacrifice, it seemed, was essential to the human species of ape. Those humans didn't follow Yahweh, though. They existed back in Dagon's homeland, in Africa, before this strange trance had settled over he and his companions, forcing them to walk hypnotized from their home northward to Egypt, and thereafter across the Red Sea, and then to Noah. Those humans in Africa were now buried underwater, as were, as Dagon understood, every other human culture outside of Noah and his family. Dagon wondered what sort of dark power this Yahweh possessed to enact such a horrific event, and what degree of control Noah had over the situation. Dagon, Nabu, Enlil, and the rest of the chimps were dragged from their dark home in the ship's steerage out onto the deck, and then by way of narrow gangplank downward atop their new rocky home. Dagon wanted to run, but he was bound and there was nowhere to go. This island was small. The storm had abated. What was left remnant were only damp, sharp rocks and pools collected within them. Unbelievably lucky ocean-dwelling creatures who had managed to ride the storm surge upward to the top of the mountain somehow had made a new home in the puddles and managed to survive. Dagon saw fish darting around the pool, amazed at their perseverance. Would they too be sacrificed? Would they, after having survived these insurmountable odds, now be eaten by Noah and his hungry family? Dagon was sure they would. He wouldn't mind eating them himself. "What should we do with all of these creatures?" said Shem, while leading the chimps, gorillas, bonobos, and other primates down from the ark onto the shore. "What if they grow rebellious? This new island is too small. The beasts could overtake us if they choose." "The beasts will not overtake us because Yahweh will not allow them to," responded Noah, standing atop the ship's deck with a look of profound accomplishment spread across his wrinkly face. Noah was right. Dagon could not rebel, though he wanted to. He wanted freedom for what remained of his band. He couldn't give them true freedom, though. Yahweh's curse was too strong. Dagon held the favor of no supernatural, world-destroying entities. Noah made a fire. He and his family sat around it as its flames, standing atop this summit at the height of the planet, crackled further skyward into the dark night, the smoke fusing with fog and dancing off free away from the campsite. Dagon envied the smoke and the fog. He and his band, along with the groups of other African apes, were tied to planks pulled from the boat and driven loosely, carelessly, into the ground. The planks weren't sturdy, but still, none of the apes could escape. In the coming days, Noah and his family, forgetting their command to make sacrifice to Yahweh, tried to build a mansion atop Mount Ararat from the remnant boards of their boat, but were unsuccessful. They inhaled greedily the fish from the pool, and thereafter, still hungry, thoughtlessly slaughtered a gazelle. It stormed after that. Not enough to overtake the summit of the mountain, only a small storm, drizzling rain, and communicative, divine thunder. "I have disobeyed Yahweh," cried Noah, sobbing and kneeling at the shore. his full belly jiggling groundward as the waves overtook his knees as if they were the squishy summit of the last mountain. He said he would provide for me, and I, in my stubbornness, refused to listen. I have killed this gazelle, one of his chosen children. He and his family, nonetheless, in the days following, ate the rest of the gazelle, and after that, several other animals, including birds, fish, and mammals. Noah tried again to build a house. He failed. He then took to drunkenness, drinking to excess the wine stored aboard the ark. After stumbling around the circumference of the summit, Noah collapsed and thereafter spent several days lying comatose in the sun, only awakening briefly to eat and drink. His family thought he may die, but eventually he awoke for good, his breath hard and pungent as a fermented swamp. "Yahweh has spoken to me," he said. "We must make sacrifice." As if magnetized, Dagon stood involuntarily from his place tied to the board. Struggling, he somehow managed to undo his bindings and walk forward to Noah. He put his long hand atop Noah's well-fed though still fragile shoulder. Dagon could do nothing. Some invisible force prevented him. He instead wept. "Good beast," said Noah, "you, being sinful in nature, will represent the baseness of humanity. Yahweh must take you. He must spill your blood. You, as a symbol of those innumerable unworthy who were drowned. A final, symbolic washing away of sin, as those now dead beneath the waves have been washed of their sin. You will symbolize the cleansing of the world." Noah then dragged toward the central fire pit. Dagon tried to struggle and free himself, but he couldn't. He was confused. Dagon was a chimpanzee. He should be much stronger than this old human, but he was helpless. The demon spirit Yahweh had granted Noah far too much unseen power for Dagon to be capable of fighting back. Noah kept dragging Dagon across the rocky summit. Dagon's band looked on from their place leashed by the neck to the weakly implanted board. Yahweh prevented them from helping Dagon. Yahweh, too, prevented the gorillas from helping, and the bonobos, and all the other animals there present. Near the fire pit sat a raised flat bed of smooth stone. Laid across the stone was a collection of kindling and also larger branches as if collected for a fire. Dagon wondered how a rock so perfectly symmetrical stood atop what used to be the summit of a great mountain. More of Yahweh's dark magic, he assumed. Without effort, Noah lifted Dagon from the ground over his shoulder and thereafter atop the stone. He didn't bother to tie Dagon down. Dagon tried to move but couldn't. He was totally powerless, as if paralyzed. Nabu wept distantly, hiding her face. Enlil shrieked, enraged. Enlil and Dagon shared a great bond. Even though Enlil was next in line in the band's hierarchy, if Dagon died, he would be the new alpha. His love for Dagon prevented him from coveting power. Family is more important than greed, more important than power. "I give you to Yahweh, my son," said Noah, looking down at Dagon gravely, in ritualistic sobriety. It started raining. Thunder cracked. Lightning struck the wood atop the stone, setting it ablaze. The flame grew undeterred by the rain, growing ever closer to Dagon, who laid entrapped upon its middle. From within his cloak, Noah removed a blade. He raised it skyward. Lightning again struck, this time homing in on the raised metal rod of Noah's blade. The electricity traversed the blade and thereafter through Noah's body, shaking him and frying his hair and beard before dying in its new home within the dampening earth. Noah glared at Dagon, wild-eyed and crazy. "I make this sacrifice for you, Yahweh!" he shrieked, his mouth agape, his teeth splitting from the remnant crackling electricity. Looking on from the edge of the boat, Shem turned, and gave the rest of the family a look of fearful uncertainty. Noah turned to them, as if feeling spiritually their distrust. "Look upon this beast," he said. "If you distrust Yahweh, if like those now drowned, you decide to put your faith in the pleasures of this world, this will be you. It will be you upon the stone, and I will not stay the divine hand of Yahweh. I could never hope to attempt such a thing." With that, Noah turned and looked one final time down at Dagon. Dagon trembled and closed his eyes. Noah grinned. He then raised the knife and drove it into Dagon's chest, piercing his frantically beating heart. After that, the flames overtook them both, though only Dagon was burned. Noah emerged unharmed from the flames and turned to acknowledge his family before thereafter tossing the blade aside. The blade landed not at all far from Enlil and Nabu, though they were incapable of moving to take it.
Well, that wraps up episode 4. We're just going to take a minute here to talk about the stories featured in episode 4. The first one being Super Serial. And first off, Derek, I want you to know that that title is actually a homage
Well, thank you.
to your story,
Social serial.
Social Serial. So, Social Serial,
Right.
where this was all about social media being used in a way for serial killers.
Correct.
Okay. So now we've got Super Serial, and even though we don't necessarily know really fully why we've called this story that, there's a hint or an indication of
Right.
where it might be going. So starts off with this superhero, kind of a Superman type,
Right.
Power Max, defeating another superhero type, which probably, if you had to make a comparison, Laser Wolf is more like an Iron Man character. With that defeat and death of Laser Wolf, Power Max has essentially gotten rid of all of the superpowered beings in this universe, and that was his mission because the authorities, the governments of the world, came to him as their agent of bringing kind of law and order back after the superheroes were running rampant across the globe, causing all kinds of death and destruction in their attempt to save us from all these other super villains and just amazing events like alien invasions,
Right.
and ginormous Godzilla-like monsters, and in this world, all that stuff exists.
Right. And it's interesting to me, I was just thinking about this too, is that it's like, now what? That those are gone. Now what happens? But it's almost like Walking Dead in the sense of, okay, these are the people that live with the zombies now. That's what the whole Walking Dead series was about.
Yeah.
In the sense of life after that, which there's still that involved. This is kind of the same thing, but with the superhero. What does he do now?
Yeah. And he's very much wanting to stay
Right.
in his current role as a superhero, taking off and battling the forces of evil and engaging in battle. He, in my mind, even though he's a Superman kind of type, I also was thinking of the character Thor,
Right.
or those kind of mythical type of heroes like Hercules or something like that. And, once more into the breach, dear friends, and holly ho, and we're gonna be these battle thirsty type of warriors who appreciate a good fight and the struggle, and then eventually the victory. So now he's confronted with Agent Cannon,
Right.
who is the representative of this agency or government body that is trying to solve this problem of all these heroes running rampant and causing chaos and villains causing chaos. And Power Max is the last one.
Yep.
So the only thing left as far as Agent Cannon is concerned is okay, Power Max, you're done.
You're done.
Hang up the cape and go retire, to some beach somewhere.
Which obviously he does not want to do.
He does not. He does not. So then we get into this whole crisis moment for Power Max. He feels he's worthless. He kind of having this massive pity party.
Right, and breakdown to a point, yeah.
Yeah, it's a breakdown, mental breakdown possibly.
Yeah.
But in it, something happens where he's sparked with an idea.
Right.
And then that leads to us being introduced to Dr. Mercurius,
Right.
who we still have yet to try to understand what he's going to do and how he's going to be implemented. So that's kind of a curious thing. Why would someone break out Dr. Mercurius, this evil genius?
Right.
And what's going to happen from here? So,
Yes.
And the only reason this is broken into two parts is because I just can't stop writing. I write too much.
I know that we're both comic book fans. I know that we
Yeah.
grew up on the superheroes and everything like that. What was maybe one of the main reasons to kind of bring this story up? For yourself?
Yeah, so of course, I've always said that anything that I've written is not anything new. It's just been inspired by other things, and certainly you can draw a lot of parallels from at least the way the action and the violence plays out in my stories to the Invincible series. You know, that one Kirkman certainly has no problem with being as gross as possible, and
Yes.
and only now it's instead of zombies, it's superheroes, right? So that series certainly has some inspiration there, and then you can pull a little bit of Dark Knight out of there from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, where Batman has his epiphany and decides to come back and take up the cause once again. So all of that was kind of wrapped into it, but this idea of the hero not wanting to lay down the cape and retire. And actually, if I say any more about it, I'm probably going to reveal part 2. So
we're good.
It'll
Just
make
an
more
idea.
sense when we get to the next episode, where part 2 will explain really what his true motivation is here.
Right.
And again, we hint at it in things like the name and some other things like the way Laser Wolf went at him in his dying moments, that kind of thing. So more to come on that. But it started off with being inspired by some of these dark superhero stories, The Watchmen and The Dark Knight and Invincible and that kind of thing, and putting my own spin on it.
Right. I liked it, and it also kind of reminded me of the one Superman movie whenever he became bad and went into a bar, and he's just flicking peanuts at the glass mirror back there because he's changed to being a bad Superman. I kind of sparked that back up in my mind. But yeah, it was very good. I like the take you did.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And again, you're right. We're comic book geeks.
Oh,
and, superhero stories, that's like, that's just awesome. Having fun with that. So the next story is by Robert Pettus. It was a submission to our podcast called The Shore of Ararat. And this one, I feel, I did not see this one coming. And I think he hits it on all marks as far as you've got a story that we learned about in Sunday school, right, as kids, and he takes it and he makes it so dark.
He does, yes.
It's so dark.
Yes.
And, I mean, you just feel horrible after the story, and you feel so bad for these animals. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what you were thinking about it?
It's Noah's Ark meets Planet of the Apes, basically.
Yeah.
I do like the different ways that is explained and brings together how things could have possibly happened. And I think you kind of were mentioning to me earlier, historical fiction in the sense of taking something that's historical and just kind of massaging it to be something that explains why this is there. And I think that's done at a great level in this story. And it is again very good with the audio that really helped keep me in the environment and get me there. And it was something that, very dark, and just really part of me liked the idea of the demise of Noah, and the other part of me was kind of sad because of the animals.
Right.
But it was, all emotions were great.
Right. Well, let's take a second to hear from Robert himself on his background and his motivation for this story, and then we'll come back and finish up our thoughts.
Hi, my name is Robert Pettus. I'm a English teacher at the University of Cincinnati. I teach English as a second language. I have a family. I'm married to my wife Mary, and I have a 1-year-old daughter named Rowan and a pet rabbit named Achilles. That's pretty much what I've got going on in my life. As far as my writing background, I started writing around COVID, I guess. I wrote a novel, and it's sort of like a coming-of-age novel, and then I branched off from that into some horror and sci-fi short stories, and that's what I do a lot of now. I'm still working on some other novels, but the short stories are kind of what comes most naturally to me, so I've got a huge collection of those, and this specific one, The Shore of Ararat, is one of those stories. So I like writing a lot of like cosmic horror, some Lovecraftian stuff, weird fiction stuff with kind of strange characters who have a little bit unclear motivations. So that was kind of the inspiration for this story, because I'm not a religious person, but religion has always been around me a lot. So I've studied religion, specifically the Abrahamic religions, pretty extensively from my childhood, where it was more of like from the standpoint of being indoctrinated to an extent, up through now where I just read as a student, I guess, of like history and culture, theology, that type of thing. So I'm more interested in it in a literary sense, but a lot of the stories from the Old Testament I have found can pretty easily be just tweaked a little bit and turned into a horror story of some sort. So the story of Noah and the ark and the flood is one of the most obvious ones, in my opinion. So I just kind of decided to change a few elements of that and transform it into a horror story where there's this sort of malevolent deity, and then tell the story from the perspective of one of the animals on the boat. I thought it would be pretty interesting, and I think it turned out pretty well, so I'm proud of that one. Thanks.
Okay, so we're back from listening to Robert, and appreciate Robert sharing his thoughts with us about that. For me, again, you know this character Noah from Sunday school and from kids' cartoons, and I mean it's one of the more gentle stories. Even though, honestly, from an adult perspective, reading it in the Bible, it's a little bit dark itself.
Right.
I mean, this idea that God is finally pissed at humanity. He's finally done.
Right.
And he's like, I'm going to just wipe them all out.
Yeah.
Except for this one family.
Mm-hmm.
And some animals,
Right.
He's like, we're going to save some animals. But I mean, you think about Noah and all of the ways that we've encountered him. There's nursery room decorations for Noah's Ark and toys for Noah's Ark, and the kids in Sunday school. I mean, literally little babies and toddlers learning about Noah's Ark. And then get into the Bible story. It's a bit dark with that premise of God wiping out the earth, but then it ends with a beautiful rainbow and this promise that God really likes us. He's not going to do this to us again.
That is not this story.
That is not this story, and
which I appreciate.
Yeah,
it's a really good story.
And he draws on so many things from the biblical story, or the facts that we know about Noah from those stories. And incorporates that into it, like the whole thing about Noah getting drunk and, having some issues with drinking. I mean, that does play out in the biblical story in a different way, of course.
Yes.
Maybe in an even more twisted way
right.
in some ways. But you just can't help but have so much sympathy for Dagon, this poor animal.
Right.
Who apparently is very intelligent. I mean,
Yes.
human level intelligent, which that I didn't see coming, and you just have so much sympathy. And then the way he portrays Yahweh or God as this dark, mystical, God that has this magic.
Yes.
I mean, it's just really. I was really drawn in, and then I was just so heartbroken over how things ended for Dagon and his family, but just well done. I mean, if you can cause those kind of emotions in a reader or someone listening to the story, I mean, you've got us.
Right.
You have hooked us, and you have done it. So, again, Robert, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and having it to be part of our podcast. So, with that, we're going to wrap up episode 4, and just a reminder again that Tales from the Shade Chronicles Podcast book is out on Amazon for your reading enjoyment. If you'd like to check one of those out, you can go to Amazon, do a search for that phrase, and you'll be able to find us, hopefully, without any issues.
It has all of our stories from the first and second season and artwork from the podcast.
Yes. Lots of good artwork. Yes,
and it's a good read. I'm reading it on my Kindle. I think I mentioned before I wrote some of these stories, as we know.
Yes.
But I'm also rereading them, and it's a very good read. They're very good. They're not, you don't have long stories. It's a book of a lot of short stories, but
yes.
It is it'll keep your attention and keep going.
Yeah, if you like short stories, something that you just can pass during a lunch break or, maybe a bathroom break, whatever, wherever you like to do your reading, certainly this book will fit the bill. However, it's not waterproof, so be careful. So with that, we will turn it over now to the preview for episode 5. And again, we'll see you next time. Next time on The Shade Chronicles. A single light snapped on overhead, illuminating the area directly around the doctor. The dark figure started to approach from the edge of the circle of light. The doctor saw the figure was tall, muscular, and male. He wore a face covering that covered his whole head and gloves as well. The figure stopped a few feet from the doctor's chair. The figure reached up and removed the mask. As it pulled away from his face, the doctor's mouth dropped when he recognized Power Max. "I'll be damned," was all the doctor could muster in his shock.
Most likely, but before that, I need you to create superpowered beings for me.
The doctor just stared in wonder at Power Max's statement. Power Max continued,
I have brought you to your old lab and have recovered some of the equipment from storage. If you require more, make me a list, and I will retrieve it for you.
The next step in Power Max's plan was to use one of the subjects to demonstrate why the authorities were unwise to release Power Max so quickly. They equipped the subject in a dark suit and full face mask to imply this was the dark figure that broke the doctor out of prison. With that, they released the subject from the lab and watched his progress through a series of sensors and small video drones that followed him along the way. When it was clear the subject was obeying the command, Power Max suited up and then left to arrive in D.C. in the nick of time to save the day. After landing in the middle of the White House grounds, the subject immediately attacked the security forces there and smashed and killed his way up to the building's front entrance. Multiple heavy machine guns, energy weapons, and even some small rockets failed to stop his progress. This subject having nearly the same invincibility and strength as his benefactor, Power Max.
But when your child disappears for 2 days, returns, and 3 years later disappears again, there are no words to explain the agony and hopelessness. This is the horror Mary is experiencing today as Detective Remy cautiously asks her questions about her missing daughter. Remy visually shudders, causing Mary to stop mid-sentence and ask him if he is okay. Remy responds with a nod, but asks to be excused to go get something from his vehicle, which is parked in front of the house with the other undercover cars and police vehicles. Detective Remy stands up and quickly goes through the crowded living room to the foyer and begins to make a straight line for the front door. With his gaze looking down at the floor, he passes other law enforcement individuals without making eye contact. He walks out of the house, straight to his car parked in front of the home. He gets into the driver's seat, closes his eyes, and tries to slow his breathing before his heart explodes out of his chest. For a moment, his head pounds as the blood pumps through his body, and he feels lightheaded. After a few seconds of concern about passing out, he regains a reasonable heart rate, wipes the sweat from his face, and puts his department-issued cell phone in the passenger seat. Remy then looks from the phone in his passenger seat and to the center console and reluctantly reaches for the latch and lifts the top. With an overwhelming feeling of dread and odd déjà vu, Remy takes out a different cell phone from the console, enters his password, and begins to scroll through the few names listed on the contact page. He hesitantly selects the contact that is the only one that can help with this situation. Ironically, this contact became a big part of his life, and not by his choice, but he knows that this is the only way to get this kind of help he needs for Erica's disappearance.
Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles Podcast is the creative property of Derek Leffridge and Lawrence Trokey. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of The Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of The Shade Chronicles.